Hello, this is Sarah Brash. Welcome back to my channel. So I want to do a video about critical race theory. Now, I'm going to define critical race theory. Here's the issue, and I know that probably most of the people who are going to watch this video already are well aware of the fact that there's just a huge uproar about what is critical race theory. Is it critical race theory that's actually being taught to public school children, even in elementary schools, and junior highs, middle schools, high schools? What does it mean for critical race theory to be taught at public universities in the classroom? What does it mean for it to be taught at private universities? So everyone's all up in arms about critical race theory, and especially people, including parents across the US, are up in arms about critical race theory being taught to their children in public schools, even in public elementary schools. So the problem is that the woke activists, the journalists, the academics, the politicians, they are playing a shell game over the name critical race theory and what critical race theory is. And what I want to say first and foremost to everyone, which I've been saying publicly for a long time now, especially on Twitter, on social media, is do not get sucked into this shell game. Okay, it's a scam, and do not get sucked into playing a shell game over the definition of critical race theory, because that's what the woke activists are doing. They're playing a shell game. And so the target moves every time you give a criticism, a valid objection to what they are in that instance referring to as critical race theory. Then all of a sudden they change the definition of critical race theory. They change the name of critical race theory. Now they're going to call it intersectionality. Now they're going to call it woke intersectional feminism. Now they're going to call it cultural relativism. So the name is always going to change, and the definition is always going to change as soon as you give a valid, legitimate criticism, objection to whatever it is in that instance the woke activist is referring to as critical race theory. Do not get sucked into this shell game. Okay, so I have been a human and civil rights licensed attorney and activist for well over a decade now, almost 2 decades now. And so I know what critical race theory is. Yes, it did originate in law schools as a legal theory. And, one of the prime main originators of critical race theory is Kimberly Crenshaw. And as Christopher Rufo has very astutely pointed out, which he also attempted to point out with Joy Reid on MSNBC on the Read Out when he went on there to debate her over, whether or not critical race theory should be taught in public schools in particular. So what he very astutely pointed out is that Kimberly Crenshaw herself actually asserts that critical race theory is more or less synonymous with intersectionality. Okay, so over a decade ago, when I worked with Ni Pute Ni Soumise in Paris, France, a fierce women's rights organization comprised primarily of women from the Muslim immigrant communities, ghettoized communities, oppressed communities around the major cities of France. So when I worked with them over a decade ago now, as a human rights attorney, what we called critical race theory then, and what it was widely known as, including in law schools, is cultural relativism, okay? And I also want to make clear that I actually use the concept of intersectionality in my work as a philosopher of law and language, okay? So I know what these terms mean, and I have a definition that I have used now for well over a decade, almost 2 decades. As a licensed human and civil rights attorney and activist, I have a definition of critical race theory. And so what it is critical race theory is an ideology that asserts that a person who is deemed to be a member of an oppressed subsocial group has a higher moral or legal or epistemic status than a person who is considered to be a member of an oppressor subsocial group of the larger social group. Sub doesn't have a normative connotation, it just means a smaller subsection of the larger social group. And that is my definition of critical race theory, and that is also my definition of cultural relativism, and that is also more or less my definition of woke intersectional feminism. And I want to make clear that intersectionality does not necessarily have a normative connotation. And what intersectionality, the way I define it and the way I use it as a philosopher of law and language, is that it is the fact that members of subsocial groups may have access to linguistic concepts to which members of the larger social group may not have access. That is what it means. There is not necessarily any normative connotation associated with that. And I consider woke intersectional feminism to be the bastardized, weaponized, and bigoted version of intersectionality, okay? And I consider essentially woke intersectional feminism to be more or less synonymous with cultural relativism and more or less synonymous with critical race theory. And I've already given you that definition. So I will point out that cultural relativism, so the first objection someone will make to me is that cultural relativism doesn't necessarily have a normative connotation either. It just means that the morality, is relative to whichever cultural group about which we're speaking. So, that may be true, may have been true at one point, but unlike intersectionality, which actually has a term, woke intersectional feminism, which is the bastardization, which is the weaponized and bigoted version thereof, there really is no other name for cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is both the name of the ideology that does not have the normative connotation, as well as the bastardization, the bigoted and weaponized version thereof. So that's the same name. So even though there's a separate name for woke intersectional feminism as distinct from intersectionality, that's not the case for cultural relativism. So that is the definition that I have used for almost 2 decades as a licensed human and civil rights attorney and activist. That is the definition of cultural relativism. It was also referred to as obscurantism by Ni Pute Ni Soumise in Paris, France, and when they are referring specifically to the Muslim immigrant groups, social groups residing in France, they also refer to it as Islamism. So that is the definition that I've been working with for a very long time. Now, the definition that when the woke activists are playing this shell game, one definition that they will put forward is they'll say, oh, it's just the history and sociology. They basically will just try to start saying that it's just the history and sociology of racism as a systemic force. So now, uh, this is just smoke and mirrors and hand waving to obscure the truth, and they all know this. So, what I find so fascinating is that, or not really that fascinating, it's pretty obvious, is that all of these activists who are, so adamant that we're making a mountain out of a molehill, and, critical race theory is just the history and sociology of racism as a systemic force in society. And so they're like, we're not about attacking individuals. It's not about blaming individuals for racism. It's about studying it as a systemic force in society. But what's so curious about this is that so many of these activists, like attorney Ben Crump, and like, Tim Wise, they spend most of their time, especially on Twitter and social media, attacking individuals, blaming individuals, including children and including black children, because attorney Ben Crump, and Tim Wise, they jumped at the opportunity to attack and try to destroy and try to get killed the SFA State U girls, who were the victims of a Living While Black hate crime hoax at SFA State University in Texas. So neither of them has ever acknowledged this, and I spent days trying to, push back and protect those girls, especially on Twitter, on social media. And I screamed on Twitter at Tim Wise and Ben Crump for their calling for those girls to be prosecuted, some of whom were young black girls, well, young women, but 18. I think the oldest of them was 18. I think they were teenagers, freshmen in their first year at SFA State University. I believe all of them. So, anyway, they are attacking. They called for those girls to be doxxed, to be destroyed, to be prosecuted. It was vicious, it was evil. They have never acknowledged it. They have never apologized for what they've done. They've never retracted their statements. And these are the people who are trying to tell us that critical race theory is no big deal, and that it's just the study of racism as a systemic force in society. It's just the history and sociology of racism as a systemic force in society. But what's so infuriating about that, it's bogus, it's a completely bogus claim, is that these woke activists keep attacking individuals, including children, including black children, and putting their lives in danger. So, anyway, right. And I'll do another video about this. I don't want this video to get too long. I'll do another video about this, but I literally just had to beg for my life on Twitter. And I was recently again attacked by blue checkmark public figures on Twitter, and they use woke intersectional feminism and critical race theory to justify their attacks against me, because, of course, it cannot be the case that that there is a false accusation of racism by a black person against a white person. That cannot happen according to critical race theory. So they use this to justify attacking me and repeatedly trying to mob me to suicide, even now, even more than 3 years after the obvious Living or Not Being While Black hate crime hoax at Yale. So I don't want this video to get too long, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to make a bunch of other videos tonight. I'm sorry it's been a while. It's just hard for me because I know I'm going to be just viciously attacked every time I make a video, but I know that I need to do it, and these videos about critical race theory are especially important. Okay, I love you all so much. I'll have all of my fundraising links below, my GoFundMe, my PayPal me, my link to Rend as a legal group, my wonderful attorneys, and I will talk to you all soon. Okay, have a great night. Take care.